Welcome back to the Inner Core Show. I'm your host, Mr. B. In this segment, we are going to discuss Donald Trump defending Tucker Carlson's interview of Nick Fuentes. For those who have not been following along, this has been a major point of contention. Tucker Carlson, a right-wing commentator, has interviewed Nick Fuentes, which is a fairly young kid, but he's a pretty influential guy with amongst young upcoming right-wing voters. And he had been canceled for some time, and Tucker Carlson essentially gave him a platform. Nick Fuentes is known as being someone who has said some controversial things about across the board, about women, about Black people, about Jews, and the supports that the United States government gives to them. And so I guess it was a cardinal rule for Tucker Carlson not to give this man a platform, even though he himself had his own conflicts with Nick Fuentes. And unfortunately, he did. And it caused a stir. As a result of him doing that, I guess the Jewish coalition joined forces and started attacking Tucker, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, across the board. And so, since that took place about a week or two ago, it seems as if Donald Trump has come in defense of Tucker Carlson. And so we have a clip here from The Hill where they discuss, what was said and kind of bring some more light to the issue. So for those who's not following, this should help to bring you up to speed on what's going on. All right, let's jump right into it.
Been at the center of debate in conservative circles since interviewing Nick Fuentes on his podcast last month. The interview was critiqued by many who said that Carlson didn't do enough to push back against Fuentes' more extremist views, and instead opted to ask him easier questions. The article reads, in choosing not to challenge Mr. Fuentes' anti-Semitism during their discussion on his popular YouTube show, Mr. Carlson focused furious new attention on whether he was deliberately mainstreaming views that were once embraced only on the fringes of American politics, and, in particular, whether he was seeking to further inject far-right ideology into the Republican Party as it begins to think about what it will stand for after President Trump leaves office. The article goes on to describe a dinner between the two that Carlson hosted at his house prior to the interview. Quote, the host could see that Mr. Fuentes, who came alone, was rattled, like he thought it was a hit or something. In a text exchange, Mr. Fuentes confirmed that he was very uneasy and thought that the show would most likely be a full-on ambush or at least very negative. Mr. Fuentes added that after the two went over what the discussion topics would be, he felt much more comfortable.
That part of the article drew strong reactions on social media, with many saying it showed Carlson only wanted to do a softball interview. Newsweek contributor Joel Petlin writes, Tucker's defenders were fine with him platforming a Nazi because it's normal to interview people who you vehemently disagree with. Now that we know that they had dinner and Tucker planned to only throw softballs to make Fuentes comfortable, there's zero reason to still defend him. But journalist Glenn Greenwald, a big defender of Tucker Carlson, said that Tucker has dinner with every guest who goes to his studio. The claim that Tucker didn't push back on any of Fuentes' views is the byproduct either of not having watched the interview and or extreme dishonesty. Most of it was about their differing views and argumentation. He continues, what Tucker didn't do was pound the table and turn red in the face and scream Nazi and racist at Fuentes. Since that childish name-calling is how the pro-Israel faction conducts itself, it assumes that's the only way to push back. Some actually engage on the substance.
Even President Trump offered a defense for Carlson, Trump telling reporters on Sunday, you can't tell him who to interview.
Well, and that I agree.
Yeah.
Again, I actually agree with Trump's framing of it. He didn't get into the weeds of it. He just said, well, he can have on his show who he wants. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. And I don't like the platforming versus not platforming distinction. And I agree with Glenn to a point that if you watch the entire interview, as I've said numerous times, it is not the case that Tucker did not challenge Fuentes whatsoever or just nodded in agreement with everything Fuentes said. Tucker talked about how his opposition to what Israel is doing is not at all rooted in anti-Semitism, and in fact, many of the most full-throated defenders of the Israeli government are not themselves Jewish, and he thinks collective identity group discussions are morally wrong and violate his faith as a Christian. Tucker said all of that in the interview. I don't agree with Glenn, though, that it's, and I love Glenn, but that that it's either that or if you're screaming racist Nazi at someone, like that's what people are wanting. No, I don't want you to just scream racist or Nazi at him, but you could see the Ted Cruz interview that Tucker did was very tough, arguably a little too tough and unfair to Ted Cruz at some times, when he was like, oh really, well what's the population of Iran, and Ted couldn't produce it. Now I think it was a good interview, and I thought it got at some fundamental tensions in Ted Cruz's worldview, how he views his mission of being the most pro-Israel congressman and where that comes from, and biblically, like, it was revealing and useful. That was not done to Fuentes. The probing of how you form views of collective identity and how that might be in tension with some other views you had, and you say that you don't practice hatred or you won't vote on violence on anyone, but you've said, you could say, well, but what about when you've said this and this and this? Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be you're a Nazi, you're a fascist. That CNN interview with Candace Owens that we talked about last week is a fine example. She was perfectly polite to her. She didn't say she was spreading misinformation, or that she said, but you're saying that, or you're implying that it's being covered up who really did this, and I'm telling you that I want to know that that's the case. If that is true and I would publish it, what is the evidence for that? That was not how it was handled.
Right. It was softer than that. And I think that's the central problem. The central problem is the fusion of bringing someone who is clearly anti-Semitic and clearly racist and has expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler on, and being very accommodating, I would say, in response to his views. Some of those views, oddly, like Fuentes, if I'm recalling correctly, expressed admiration for Stalin at one point.
Right, and that was not followed up.
And that was not followed up.
Huge mistake, because I'd actually never even heard him say that before. Mm-hmm. So it would have been educational to get at why he was thinking that. And to be clear, I don't want to come across as a hypocrite here. It is difficult to do confrontational interviews or interviews that are adversarial in some way, even when they're polite. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of talent on the part of the person doing it. We've done interviews. We do fewer of them than we used to, but done a lot of interviews on this show. They're not always confrontational, even when I do disagree with the person on. Now we have a slightly different format where maybe I'm nicer to a guest of my ideological disposition, and you or whoever it is less so. But it's much more fun to just ask the person soft questions and have them talk.
Well, it is, except I wouldn't like us to have Nick Fuentes on, for example, because I think that, words like platform and deplatform, I just think that person's views have been so clearly expressed over such a long period of time, mm-hmm. that I've just no interest in hearing what he has to say. That's my kind of issue.
I would like to interview him. I would not do it on, our show has stricter time constraints than we used to have. I would not want to talk to him for a 10 to 15 minute TV. There's not time to get into the depths of things I would like to cover with him. So I would absolutely do it. My point being, there is a natural, if you're a warm person, Tucker is a warm person. I know him a little bit personally. I like the guy. He's a nice guy. He's easy to get along with.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. It seems like the critique here is that they feel as if Tucker Carlson did not have a tough enough interview with Nick Fuentes. That he didn't ask tough questions to kind of hold his feet to the fire on certain things he said or maybe have done in the past. Now, the same criticism came of Tucker Carlson, who's my guy, I might add. I'm a big fan of his. I think has been generally a fair guy and takes accountability when he misses it. Don't agree with him on everything, but I think he tries. So I can respect certain aspects about him. I think he had the same criticism when he did the Vladimir Putin interview. We're at war with a guy, and there was a group of people in Washington who wanted him who wanted Donald Trump to continue to support this war, and Putin was not talking to anybody on the U.S. side. At this point, I don't believe it was Donald Trump in office at this point. I think it was, what's the last guy's name? Joe Biden, who was in office at the time. And Tucker went ahead and did an interview with Vladimir Putin. And unfortunately, the interview was not one that was contentious enough that people think. They think he didn't press Vladimir Putin enough. And the guy just was going over there to have a conversation, to get a better sense, to hopefully bring some understanding to the viewers about what the other side thinks and why things are happening, because he didn't feel like we were getting the full story. So I don't personally fault the way that the man chose to do his interview. It is his show. He did decide that he wanted to host this particular person. He asked him the questions he wanted to ask him. He could have made it contentious. There's certainly been some back and forth between the two men, but for whatever reason, he did not take it there, and he conducted his interview. But apparently, it didn't rub everybody the right way, because they felt like he should have been tougher, or he shouldn't have had him on at all. And so that raises a question as to, is it free speech if he can't do what he pleases? I think, to Donald Trump's credit, he came out and said the guy can interview whoever he wants to interview. It is a free country. I think that's the right reaction to have. And I think this whole thing is about who influences Donald Trump's decision. Obviously, Nick Fuentes raises some points about the influence of the Israeli government on the U.S. Congress people and the U.S. Senate, as well as just the U.S. government, and how we're fighting these wars on behalf of the Israeli government, and that all this is about funding, whether we're supporting and meeting the agenda of the leaders of the Israeli government. That's the argument they're trying to make. And there's a group of people who disagree with that, and they change the conversation to be about something else. Tucker, who himself is critical of that influence, has come under fire because of the questions that he asks. And so, it's a lot of back and forth, which is kind of dividing the right now. Nobody's on the same page about anything. And it's interesting because they just lost to gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia. And there's a midterm coming up. So who's going to take charge is up in the air. And the Democrats definitely would like to see this squabble continue to happen, because these are all internal battles that seems to be dividing the right. Who's right, who's wrong remains to be seen, but it's all about who can influence the decisions that Donald Trump makes. And he doesn't seem to be unwilling to listen to both sides. So I think Tucker is trying to bring attention to his point of view, along with Nick Fuentes and Candace. And there's a group on the other side that, brings to the public's attention their point of view, and they're trying to discredit the other group. And it's all meant to influence the decisions that ultimately Donald Trump will make. So in this case, it seems like Donald Trump is saying, hey, if the guy wants to interview somebody, let him interview somebody. If he doesn't, then don't. But this is essentially what's being said here, is that should he have the right to platform people that is controversial? Some people didn't think he should have interviewed Vladimir Putin. He did. I didn't necessarily fault him for that. I thought it was useful that he did that. Also, PBD, Patrick Bet-David, also went ahead and interviewed Nick Fuentes directly after interviewing Bibi Netanyahu, which is the president or prime minister of Israel. So to his credit, he was able to get both sides. And there are people who are genuinely trying to get both sides of the story. There are some people that want to understand better what the root causes are of some things, and so they will try to bring that to light. And I think Patrick Bet-David does a good job at that. And I think Tucker Carlson also does a decent job at that, where he tries to get different viewpoints. So, but the issue still continues, and all we can do is pray that they solve this problem before the midterms comes up, because it will get sticky, and this fraction will affect votes. And ultimately, we hope that, something can come of this. We'll see how it influences Donald Trump's decisions, but there's certainly everyone is talking about this particular topic.
And you want to, even when you're doing interviews, even when you want to, probe at some inconsistency you've noticed in their belief, it can be hard to do because you just want to default to a kind of friendliness. So it's difficult, but I know Tucker is very good at it because I've seen him do it with Ted Cruz and other people. And so that's what now again, he can do whatever he wants. As Trump said, it's his show. I am not joining anyone in trying to condemn him for platforming Nick Fuentes. I disagree with some of the editorial decisions he made in the course of the interview. To me, it's not really about condemning Tucker, which this seems to have consumed heritage, but it is about, there is a strident need, I think, to condemn the views that Fuentes holds.
Right.
Not so much the views Tucker holds, but the views that Fuentes holds. And that battle just needs to be decided in favor of the anti-Fuentes faction. I don't know how else to have it. You'll never elect Republicans again if you're making excuses for someone who says that Hitler is good and Nazis are good and Stalin is good. I don't know what, that's just like that's not a winning electoral strategy, if nothing else.
Right. And the point is, if you are going to bring on someone with those views to your YouTube show or whatever, then I think it is all the more incumbent on you to challenge them in a vigorous way. Yes, to take Greenwald's point, it does not have to be screaming in their face, but it has to have some level of journalistic rigor to it, because this is not interviewing somebody who is within the mainstream of political thought, which is like, oh, well, this person has a different view on taxation than I do. This is a person who has a different view on black people than I do, or an interracial marriage. And so that, I think, is a whole different category. And that's why I've no real interest in hearing Nick Fuentes. But if you're going to bring him on, I think there is an absolute imperative to push back strongly against that stuff.
No, I would like to have a conversation with him about why he thinks, again, Hitler, a genocidal dictator who is a good model for someone whose views are like very Catholic and nationalist Catholic, I assume monarchist Catholic. I've said this before. The Nazis were no friends to the church during that period. So it seems incoherent to me, and I would discuss it with him, but not in the constraints of what we do here, unfortunately.
Probably not.
Maybe somewhere else.
Perhaps so. And meanwhile, Senator John Fetterman is being praised by Republicans and scorned by Democrats.
Okay, so that covers this particular topic. We thank you guys for joining us. Definitely check out the Hills link. They definitely have a good take. There's some good conversations that takes place on that platform as well. I'm trying to diversify the viewpoints. And also, for those who's not connected, definitely like and subscribe to the show and let your voice be heard on this particular topic and others. We talk about a number of different things, from politics to religion to relationships. We try to cover it all. But today, this was one of those topics that's kind of been trending. Not exactly sure how I wanted to approach it, but this hopefully gives the people who are not as informed some insight as to what's going on, so that they can catch up to where the conversation stands as we progress from one day to the next. All right. Well, we thank you again for joining us, and we ask that you be safe, and may God bless you until we speak again.